Do you think Kid's a bozo? Are you hyped up about Shanks being a Chad? You're in the right place. Come get triggered at how Kid will start climbing the stairs of greatness and how Shanks will get squished by the end of this story. Welcome back, peeps. Today we have something nutty to talk about. There's been a major One Piece chapter which it'll impact how pretty much all of us experience Shanks and Kid's journey from here on in. You might have thought Shanks just finished Kid, and believe me, I don't blame you. Kid got annihilated, but he's not just coming back. Soon it'll be the first day of the rest of his life and his story. Stick around until the end of the copium. It helps a lot. Like and sub, and let's get into this. So, just like the Phoenix with his jaggy red hairstyle and his red feathery coat, he will rise up and come back stronger than ever. Phoenixes represent a figurative death and rebirth, like we've just seen with Kid's crew. So we're going to look at all the big hints Oda's left us so far and theorize when he's going to be back around and what his final form will look like. We've got two kind of similar characters here. Shanks and Kid both have red hair, scars on their left eyes, and a missing arm. One lost an arm betting on the future, the other one by hanging on to the past. Additionally, they both demonstrate Conqueror's Haki, which is no small feat. There's some mystery about the childhood of both of them as well, and despite the fact Shanks doesn't appear to know Kid well, Kid certainly knows Shanks, which leads me to why Kid's not finished. As we know, Kid got completely destroyed, and slander is at an all-time high. But why does he have such a bad rep? Many of you are probably laughing right now, but it's a legitimate question to ask, because unlike other characters, Kid has always been thought of as a major character. You could almost call him the big three of the worst generation, or at least someone that plays a bigger role. But so far, we've only seen L's from him, right? As the year passes, more and more people start believing he's just gonna fail, and that Oda's using him as a spare part. It was also stated that Oda planned to kill half of the supernovas, so again, stuff like this does add fuel to the fire. The faith in Kid slowly but surely fades, and yet here I am, here to convince you that this is all a big setup since the beginning, and from now on we will see the development of Kid's story and the character in full. After all, he was paired to be Luffy's rival, and was shown to slowly start trusting Luffy. Kid's fixated on Shanks for some reason, giving us another clue he's not done yet. Interestingly, Kid's still yet to properly show his conquerors. His base stats and his potential are actually insane. If he'd mastered Haki, he'd easily bosh Big Mom around and all sorts, right? You can get triggered in the comment. We saw Shanks did not expect to be so powerful, which is what caused him to rush into action. Anyway, it also might be important that in this latest chapter we had a panel where Shanks said, "Oh, so he's from the South Blue?" Potentially implying he'd been there or done something there a long time ago. Could this be the reason why Kid's so fixated on Shanks? Kid showed disinterest in Big Mom generally, so it does highlight how Kid's so focused on Shanks. Overall, Kid's behavior indicates that he's not a bad guy, but seemingly is still hanging on to his past. He still makes bad decisions because of the trauma. We've seen Oda address this throughout the story, which I'll get into in a minute. Shanks taught Luffy about picking your battle. We see this when Barto tries to provoke Luffy, and Luffy responds that it's not a battle worth fighting. This is in contrast to Kid, who doesn't understand the lesson, and instead pays the expensive price every time he tries it. In Wano, Kid ended up in Udon prison. The fact that they were in Udon, though, is hugely spicy in itself, because the food Kid and Killer hate is curried udon after their traumatic experience with Victoria. I believe this ties into what we saw in 1079. For example, the ship being split in half represents Kid splitting from his past, as the ship's name itself is Victoria as well, after their childhood friend who was killed by a rival gang, so there's definitely trauma going on. Additionally, he was submerged in water, representing the classic baptism motif, the end of a journey and beginning of another. This could even be why Oda called him Kid, and now he's got to come back as a man metaphorically, which would tie into the real life Kid's widely debated baptism in real life as well, which is interesting. Ironically, the real William Kid also had quite a traumatic upbringing around sort of the death of his father and stuff like this, so it's interesting stuff. Previously, we saw Kid, Killer, Heat, and Wire as bosses of 4 different gangs, linked by a punk theme. We can imagine the kind of behaviour he grew up around, for example, demonstrated by his love for weaponry. It also parallels the scrapyard in Goa that Luffy and Sabo grew up in. Growing up in that environment led Kid to become protective of his friends, earning him a position as like the big bro, or a captain you could say. This might be where he gets the epithet from. Anywho, this is all to say that those kids were living in a rough... I theorise despite Shanks not knowing about Kid, Kid knew about Shanks after Shanks' actions resulted in like the rough environment that Kid grew up in. This may be why Kid has such a grudge and seems obsessed with Shanks. It's no coincidence the first time he lost an arm, he didn't even see Shanks, and on the second time, he didn't have a chance to even open his mouth before getting one-shotted. It's as if Oda is not allowing them to talk, possibly because this will happen in the future, and we can then develop a better understanding of Shanks' actions and motivations. We do have Elbaf coming up as well, so it's likely to happen there if anywhere, right? Some may have also forgotten Kid's base. Interestingly, we last heard a Rouge and Balloon terminal were floating above it. Magnetism is an integral property in the One Piece story, as we know, with pirates using it for different ways of navigation, battles, and potentially even the use as a power source. Balloons and static are affected by magnets, but while this makes sense, what does it mean? Well, I doubt Oda will leave this knot untied, and Kid's base is actually very close to where we are on the map at the moment. In fact, Kid's base is one of the last points before Lodestar, so I'm thinking it's coming up alongside Arouge as well. Furthermore, let's not forget, so long as Kid doesn't die, he still holds the power of his fruit. A fruit that is like super significant in a place like Egghead, for example. It would just absolutely murk. Anywho, hold Kid in your mind for now, because I'll come back to him in a sec, but I want to quickly give Killer a rundown. Killer is another reason why the crew will come back. He was from the South Blue, similar to Saul, which is interesting because Saul was a D, but not from Elbaf. This location the two share is spicy AF because Killer talked about the man marked by flames, and Killer himself was also burned. Additionally, Killer is 25 and Nico Robin 30. The Ohara incident happened when she was 8, making Killer 3 at the time. What if Killer was from Ohara and he was saved by Saul in the midst of all the destruction? He only remembers this giant dude marked by a flame, who he saw salvaging all these books. So it makes sense that they would get closer to the One Piece if they located him. Killer was sent to the South Blue, and similar to Robin, had a rough childhood living in the scrapyard where he bonded with Kid, as I said earlier. A Three-Eyed Tribe member being in Ohara wouldn't be so strange considering the best archaeologists gathered there, and there's ties to poneglyphs. This is all to say that Saul and Killer may be tied, and we have yet to see it revealed. Killer has this scar on his right arm and a burn mark. Furthermore, we've seen Killer with the poneglyph Robins and talk about related lore. This reflects Robin's position in the Straw Hats crew, both doing their job as archaeologists and historians. If Killer was a resident of Ohara when the Buster Call landed, but somehow wasn't able to get onto a ship in time after the whole incident with Saul, Robin and Nikiji happened, then maybe after Saul defrosted and started saving the books, he found Killer. Killer got his scar on his arm during the midst of all this, but I think Saul managed a way to save him, maybe with his old raft or something like that. Killer was sent away in a similar fashion to Robin and found himself on an island where possibly a lot of other orphans and people like that were. That's where, as I said, he meets Kid and where they form the crew, which is a band of misfits, similar to what we see in Carmel's Sheep's House actually. This would explain the deal with his personality, no parental figures, and his tight bonds with his crew. As he experienced living in a harsh environment, he learned to only care about his friends and went on to support Kid in his journey for the famous One Piece treasure. Either way, I think it's where Shanks may be involved. I think maybe Shanks indirectly caused Killer to be in this situation, just like Kid and maybe some of the other kids, which would explain Killer's support of Kid's hate for Shanks, swearing on his life, very literally, that he would take him down. Now, let's take a closer look at Shanks' part in this. In 1079, we saw Elbaf being called Warland Elbaf. The fleet under Shanks was noted to contain a lot of weak people who are granted protection under Shanks' flag. Shanks tells his fleet to come back because he doesn't want them to get hurt. Makes sense. As we see throughout, he has a really close relationship with his crew, and the people in the street sort of holler and hug at him as he walks past. There's a mixture of different races and people in the chapter highlighting Shanks' indiscriminate nature and his widespread travels. Shortly after, he asks if Kid's wounds from Wano have healed, a huge nod to the fact Shanks is ensuring Kid can handle a battle without dying. There is also a panel which is very interesting. On first inspection, this panel doesn't say much, but given the context, it might imply that Shanks did something there a long time ago, or the South Blue is significant to him in some way, hence the words he uses. But as soon as Shanks sees the future where Kid is about to attack his dear friends, he reacts immediately, rushing to stop the attack and preventing what he foresaw from happening. He showed no mercy to Kid, because that's who Shanks is, an extremely kind dude that holds his friends close to his heart, but will devastate anyone who attacks them. So this chapter not only shows us his strength and his kindness, but it also obliterates Shanks' evil theories from here on out, pretty much, in my opinion. To tie up my thoughts on Shanks briefly, I think where Kid's real journey is just starting, Shanks' story is heading into its last arc. He'll meet his end fighting Blackbeard and will lose after triggering Blackbeard's awakening, just like we saw with Luffy and Kaido. Also, I expect a training up for both Luffy and Kid, preparing to reach the stage that Shanks, Kaido and Big Mom were on, or are on, maybe. The final war itself could actually be triggered in a similar way to Ace's death, but instead with Shanks' death, in my opinion. it might happen earlier than people think. To summarise, I think Kid's real journey is just beginning, evidenced by a story not having any closure yet whatsoever. I think he'll go from a little kid to a big man Chad. Kid's flower Oda chose for him is a tulip, which is a flower that blossoms at the first light of spring. So, you know, if you relate that to the sun and the sort of seasonal and moon theories in One Piece, then it shows that this is the time for Kid to come back. His name is literally Kid, denoting how his character is juvenile. I think Kid will come back after his defeat, but his epithet of captain will become more relevant, like it will hold more meaning. To finish off, I hope I changed your mind at least a little bit about Kid basically not being a total waste of space, and Shanks, unfortunately, probably ending earlier than we think. So yeah, enjoy him while you can. Upcoming, we have both the moon theory and the old hag theory I was talking about before. Like and give it a share, and if you made it this far, you've just won a week-long vacation in the Undersea Hotel Impel Down. Let me know what floor you'd like in the comments. Kid will outlive Shanks. Peace!